Rosie Murphy hummed a quiet Irish tune as she pushed her cleaning cart down the empty corridors of New Eden Station, her worn boots making soft echoes against the polished floors. The night shift had always been her preference. Fewer people meant fewer problems, and after 30 years of cleaning up after politicians and diplomats, she had learned to appreciate the peaceful silence that came with working while the rest of the station slept. The luxury quarters of the diplomatic sector stretched before her like a maze of wealth and power, each suite more extravagant than the last. But tonight her destination was the penthouse office of Ambassador William Cross, humanity's most ruthless negotiator, and the man who made deals that shaped the fate of entire worlds. Cross had a reputation that preceded him across the galaxy, known for his cold efficiency and his ability to extract maximum profit from any situation involving alien species. As Rosie approached the ambassador's office, she could still smell the lingering scent of expensive cigars and alien spices from whatever high-stakes meeting had taken place earlier that evening. The heavy doors stood slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see scattered papers and empty glasses, the aftermath of another session where human interests were prioritized above all else. She had worked in these halls long enough to overhear conversations that would make most people sick to their stomachs, discussions about resource allocation and asset management that treated living beings like inventory items in a warehouse. Cross spoke about alien refugees the same way other people might discuss mining equipment or shipping containers, cold, calculating, and completely devoid of empathy. Pushing open the doors with her security card, Rosie entered the opulent office, space that could have housed a dozen families in comfort. The walls were lined with trophies from Cross's various diplomatic victories, artifacts and weapons taken from worlds that had been negotiated into human control, each piece representing another species that had been forced to surrender their autonomy for the promise of protection. The ambassador's desk was a monument to excess, carved from a single piece of crystalline stone that had once been sacred to a now extinct alien civilization. Papers were scattered across its surface, along with several empty bottles of expensive earth wine and the remnants of what looked like a celebration dinner. Whatever deal Cross had been working on, it was clearly close to completion. Rosie began her routine, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces while trying to ignore the sick feeling in her stomach that always came with cleaning this particular office. She had learned not to read the documents that lay scattered around. Some knowledge was too heavy for a simple cleaning woman to carry, and she needed this job to support her sister's family back on Earth. As she reached for the wastebasket beside Cross's desk, something caught her eye. A piece of crumpled biopaper that had missed the bin and lay on the floor beside it. The paper was the cheap recycled kind used in the station's lower levels, completely out of place in this shrine to human superiority. Curiosity got the better of her, and she picked up the discarded paper, smoothing it out against her cleaning cart. What she saw made her heart stop. Written in shaky, childish handwriting using what was clearly a basic translation device, the words formed a letter that seemed to glow with innocent hope despite being thrown away like garbage. Dear Santa Claus, my name is Little Spark, and I am a very small dragon who lost my family when the sky fell down on my home. I heard from other children that you bring presents to good children who write letters, and I try very hard to be good even when I am scared. The letter continued in the same heartbreaking tone, describing loneliness and fear with the simple honesty that only a child could possess. I do not need many presents, just one friend who will not go away. The other little dragons cry at night because we miss our families, and we do not understand why the humans keep us in the cold rooms. We try to help by making the plants grow and fixing the broken things, but nobody says thank you. At the bottom of the letter, drawn in what looked like charcoal or ash, was a picture that made Rosie's eyes fill with tears. A small, dragon-like creature with outstretched wings was reaching toward a human figure, with little hearts drawn between them and the word friends written in shaky letters underneath. The innocence and hope in that simple drawing stood in stark contrast to the cold calculations happening in the office above. Rosie realized immediately what she was looking at. This was a letter from one of the Draco refugee children who had been brought to the station after the mining disaster on their homeworld. She had heard whispers about them from other cleaning staff, stories about small dragon-like beings who were being kept in the lower levels, while politicians decided their fate. Most people assumed they were being processed for relocation to safe worlds, but Rosie had lived long enough to know that when politicians got involved, safety was rarely the primary concern. The fact that this letter had been in Cross's wastebasket told her everything she needed to know about how the ambassador viewed these innocent children. To him, they were not beings capable of hope and dreams, but simply another problem to be solved through negotiation and paperwork. The casual cruelty of throwing away a child's letter to Santa revealed the depth of his indifference to their suffering. As Rosie stood in that opulent office, holding the discarded letter in her trembling hands, she felt something shift inside her chest. For 30 years she had cleaned up after the messes made by powerful people, staying invisible and keeping her opinions to herself because that was how working-class people survived in a galaxy controlled by the wealthy and connected. But looking at Little Spark's letter, at the drawing of a small dragon reaching out for friendship, she realized that some things were more important than job security. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her uniform pocket, her mind already racing with possibilities. Somewhere in the lower levels of this station, there were children who still believed in kindness and hope, despite losing everything they had ever known. They were writing letters to Santa Claus because they had heard that humans sometimes showed mercy to the innocent and helpless. What they didn't know was that their letters were being thrown away by the very people who held their futures in their hands. But now one letter had found its way to someone who still remembered what it felt like to believe in the possibility of Christmas miracles. Rosie Murphy might just be a cleaning woman with an Irish accent and tired hands, but she had raised 4 children of her own and knew the sound of a child's cry for help when she heard it. As she finished cleaning Cross's office and prepared to move on to the next suite, Rosie made a decision that would change not only her own life but the fate of an entire species. She was going to find Little Spark and the other dragon children, and she was going to make sure that someone finally answered their letters with the kindness they deserved. 3 hours before dawn shift change, Rosie found herself standing before the maintenance elevator that led to the station's lower levels, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The letter, from Little Spark, burned in her pocket like a piece of molten metal, and she knew that once she stepped into that elevator, there would be no going back to the comfortable ignorance that had protected her for so many years. Her maintenance access card trembled in her weathered hands as she swiped it across the scanner. The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a cramped space that smelled of recycled air and industrial cleaning solutions. A far cry from the perfumed luxury of the upper diplomatic levels where she normally worked. As the elevator descended deeper into the station's belly, Rosie felt as though she was traveling not just through space but through the layers of human society itself, moving from the gleaming surface down into the hidden darkness where inconvenient truths were kept. The doors opened onto a corridor that looked more like a prison than a refugee center. Harsh fluorescent lights cast everything in sickly yellow tones, and the walls were bare metal painted in institutional gray that seemed designed to crush hope rather than nurture it. The air was thick with the smell of too many bodies in too small a space, mixed with something else, something that reminded Rosie of the scent of flowers trying to bloom in poor soil. She followed the corridor deeper into the lower levels, guided by instinct and the faint sound of what might have been crying or singing. It was hard to tell which. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, and she found herself moving more quietly, as though she were entering a sacred space that demanded reverence and respect. The maintenance corridors branched off in several directions, but she followed. The main path toward what her station maps indicated was a large common area. When she reached the entrance to what had once been a cargo bay, Rosie stopped and pressed her face against the small window in the reinforced door. What she saw inside made her knees weak and her vision blur with tears. Dozens of small dragon-like creatures, none larger than human toddlers, were huddled together on thin mats spread across the cold metal floor. Their scales shimmered in colors ranging from silver to deep gold, and their wings were folded close to their bodies as though trying to conserve warmth. The children, for that was clearly what they were, despite their alien appearance, moved, with the cautious grace of wild animals who had learned that the world was full of dangers. Some were tending to small plants that grew in makeshift containers, their tiny clawed hands glowing with a soft light that seemed to encourage growth. Others huddled together in groups, their large eyes reflecting intelligence and emotions that were painfully familiar to anyone who had ever comforted a frightened child. As Rosie watched through the window, she saw one of the smaller dragons approach, a section of exposed wall circuitry that was sparking intermittently. The little creature placed its hands on the damaged panel, and the sparking stopped as the circuits began to glow with steady, healthy light. These children were not just surviving in this harsh environment. They were actively trying to improve it, using abilities that seemed to bridge the gap between technology and nature. Her maintenance access card worked on this door as well, and as it slid open, every dragon child in the room turned to look at her with eyes that held too much sadness for being so young. They shrank back against the walls, clearly expecting another human who would see them as problems to be solved rather than children to be protected. The sight of their fear cut through Rosie's heart like a blade, and she felt ashamed to be part of a species that could inspire such terror in innocent beings. One small dragon, with scales that seemed to shift between silver and gold in the harsh light, stepped forward from the group. It was smaller than the others, and its movements held the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to be brave despite being terrified. As it approached, Rosie could see that its large eyes were the color of sunlight on water, bright and intelligent and filled with a hope that somehow persisted despite everything. "Are you here to take us away?" the small dragon asked in heavily accented English, its voice carrying the musical quality that seemed natural to its species. "We have been trying very hard to be good. We fix the broken things and make the plants grow, just like Mama taught us before the sky fell down." Rosie knelt down to bring herself to the dragon's eye level, her knees protesting against the cold metal floor. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked gently, using the same tone she had once used with her own children when they woke from nightmares. "I am called Little Spark," the dragon replied, and Rosie's heart nearly stopped as she realized she was face to face with the author of the letter that had changed everything. "I wrote a letter to Santa Claus, but I think maybe it got lost. Do you know Santa Claus? Is he real like the other children say?" The innocent question hit Rosie harder than any political speech or diplomatic argument ever could. Here was a child who had lost everything, family, home, security, and still believed in the possibility that someone might care enough to help. The fact that this hope existed in the face of such casual cruelty made her angry in a way she had never experienced before. "Your letter wasn't lost, Little Spark," Rosie said, pulling the crumpled paper from her pocket and smoothing it out between them. "I found it, and I think maybe I'm here because Santa wanted someone to read it and understand what you need." Little Spark's eyes grew wide with wonder as he saw his letter again, and several other dragon children crept closer to see what was happening. "You read my letter?" he whispered. "Does that mean Santa knows about us? Does that mean someone remembers that we are here?" As more of the dragon children gathered around, Rosie began to understand the full scope of what was happening in this forgotten corner of the station. These were not just refugees waiting for new homes. They were children who possessed abilities that could revolutionize how humans understood the relationship between technology and nature. Their empathic connection to living systems made them natural healers and engineers, capable of fixing complex problems through intuition and compassion rather than brute force. But she also realized something else. Something that made her blood run cold. Children with such valuable abilities would be seen as resources by people like Ambassador Cross, not as individuals deserving of freedom and protection. The conversation she had overheard in the upper levels suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. These children were not being prepared for new homes, but for a life of service to human interests. "Little Spark," she said carefully, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Has anyone told you what's going to happen next? Has anyone explained where you're going to live?" The small dragon's expression grew troubled, and he looked back at his companions before answering. "The cold man came yesterday with papers. He said we would go to new places where we could help humans build better worlds. But when he left, the older children whispered that helping might mean never seeing each other again." Rosie felt sick too. Her stomach as the full horror of the situation became clear. These innocent children, who had already lost everything once, were about to be separated and distributed across human space as biological tools for terraforming and engineering projects. Their natural abilities made them incredibly valuable, but treating them as resources rather than individuals was nothing short of slavery. As she looked into Little Spark's trusting eyes, surrounded by dozens of other dragon children who still believed that adults might protect them rather than exploit them, Rosie made a decision that would put her own safety at risk. She was going to find a way to expose what was happening here, and she was going to make sure that someone with the power to help finally answered these children's letters. But first, she needed allies. People who still remembered that being human meant more than just taking whatever you could get away with taking. Dr. Sam Wells was finishing his third cup of coffee when Rosie Murphy appeared in the doorway of the medical bay, looking like someone who had seen a ghost and couldn't decide whether to run toward it or away from it. He had known Rosie for 5 years, ever since she had started working the night shift, and he had never seen the unflappable Irish woman look so shaken. Not even during the station's worst emergencies when blood and chaos filled his normally quiet medical center. "Dr. Wells," she said, her voice carrying a tremor that seemed to vibrate through the sterile air of the medical bay. "I need to show you something. But first you have to promise me that you won't think I'm crazy or stupid for caring about things that aren't supposed to be my business." Sam set down his coffee cup and studied Rosie's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands shook slightly as she gripped her cleaning supplies. In his 20 years as a doctor, he had learned to recognize the signs of someone carrying a burden too heavy for one person to bear alone. "Rosie, you're one of the smartest people on this station," he said gently. "If something's bothering you enough to bring it to me at 4 in the morning, then it's definitely my business too." Without saying another word, Rosie pulled out Little Spark's letter and placed it on the medical examination table between them. Sam picked up the crumpled bio paper and began to read, his expression growing darker with each line of the child's innocent plea for friendship. When he reached the drawing at the bottom, the small dragon reaching out toward a human figure, his hands clenched into fists and his jaw tightened in a way that Rosie had never seen before. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice carrying the carefully controlled anger of a man who had spent years learning to hide his emotions behind professional detachment. "Please tell me this isn't from the refugee children in the lower levels, because if it is, then I'm about to do something that will probably get me fired or worse." Rosie's heart leaped with hope as she realized that Dr. Wells already knew about the dragon children, which meant he might be willing to help rather than report her for interfering with diplomatic matters. "You've been down there," she said. "You've seen what they're doing to those babies." Sam rubbed his forehead wearily and sank into his desk chair as though the weight of the world had suddenly settled on his shoulders. "I've been treating them for malnutrition and stress-related illnesses for weeks," he admitted. Ambassador Cross insisted that their medical care be kept off the official records, which should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. But I'm bound by doctor-patient confidentiality, and I assumed they were just processing the children for relocation to safe colonies. "They're not relocating them," Rosie said, her voice rising with urgency. "I think Cross is planning to sell them to mining companies or terraforming operations. Those children have abilities that could make someone incredibly wealthy, and Cross doesn't care that they're just babies who want someone to love them." The doctor's face went pale as the implications sank in. "That would explain why he keeps asking me about their useful capabilities instead of their medical needs," he said slowly, "and why he wanted detailed reports on their empathic abilities and their connection to biological systems. I thought he was just being thorough, but he was actually evaluating them like livestock." Sam stood up and began pacing around the medical bay, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. "Even if we wanted to stop this, what could we do? I'm just a doctor and you're just a cleaning woman. No offense intended. Cross has the backing of the entire diplomatic corps and half the corporate interests in human space. Who's going to listen to us when we're going up against that kind of power?" Before Rosie could answer, the medical bay doors slid open and Captain Rita Stone walked in, her military uniform rumpled and her expression grim. "Sorry to interrupt, Doc, but I need another case of those anti-anxiety medications for my crew," she said. "Half my people are having nightmares about what we might be ordered to do tomorrow." and the other half are drinking themselves into unconsciousness to avoid thinking about it. Sam and Rosie exchanged glances, both realizing that Captain Stone might be the ally they desperately needed. "Rita," Sam said carefully, "what exactly are your orders for tomorrow?" The captain looked around the medical bay as though checking for surveillance devices, then moved closer to Sam and Rosie. "We're supposed to transport the dragon children to 3 different destinations across human space," she said in a low voice. "Officially, it's a relocation mission to establish them in new homes. Unofficially, my crew and I know exactly what kind of homes we're delivering them to, and it's making us all sick." Rosie felt her heart sink as her worst fears were confirmed. "How many destinations?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer would break her heart. 3 mining operations, 2 terraforming stations, and 1 research facility, Captain Stone replied, her voice heavy with disgust. "They're splitting up the children based on their individual abilities. The ones who can accelerate plant growth go to terraforming, the ones who can repair technology go to mining operations, and the ones who show the strongest empathic abilities go to the research facility for further study." Sam slammed his fist against the medical examination table, making instruments rattle. "They're breaking up families," he said. "These children have already lost their parents and their homeworld, and now Cross wants to separate them from each other so they can never form the support networks they need to survive." Captain Stone nodded grimly. "My crew has been asking questions about the mission parameters, and I've been stalling for time by claiming we need additional safety protocols for transporting alien children. But Cross is getting impatient, and tomorrow night is the deadline. After that, I won't have any choice but to follow orders or face court-martial for insubordination." Rosie looked at the 2 people who had just become her partners in what felt like an impossible mission. "What if we could prove to the rest of humanity what's really happening here?" she asked. "What if we could show them that these aren't just resources to be exploited, but children who deserve the same protection we'd give to human kids?" "The public doesn't get to see classified diplomatic negotiations," Sam pointed out. "Cross controls all the information that goes out about the refugee situation, and he's been very careful to present it as a humanitarian relocation program rather than what it really is." But Captain Stone was already shaking her head. "Actually, that might not be true," she said slowly. "My ship has full communication access to the civilian networks. It's required for emergency situations. If we could get evidence of what's really happening down there, we could broadcast it directly to the human colonies before Cross could stop us." For the first time since finding Little Spark's letter, Rosie felt a spark of genuine hope. "The children themselves are the evidence," she said. "If people could see them, could hear them talking about wanting friends and writing letters to Santa Claus, no human parent would stand for what Cross is planning to do." Dr. Wells nodded slowly. "And I have all the medical records showing the effects of their current living conditions," he added. "Malnutrition, stress disorders, depression, symptoms that don't develop in children who are being properly cared for while waiting for new homes." Captain Stone stood up straighter, and for the first time since entering the medical bay, she looked like the military officer she was trained to be. "Then we have less than 24 hours to put together a plan that will either save those children or get us all court-martialed for treason," she said. "Are you both ready to risk everything on the chance that humanity still has enough conscience left to do the right thing?" Rosie thought about Little Spark's trusting eyes and his carefully drawn picture of a dragon reaching out for friendship with humans. She thought about all the other dragon children huddled together in that cold cargo bay, still believing that someone might answer their letters and remember that they were more than just valuable resources. "I've been playing it safe my whole life," she said. "Maybe it's time to find out what happens when ordinary people decide to be extraordinary." The diplomatic ceremony hall had been transformed into a stage for what Ambassador Cross considered his greatest triumph, with crystalline chandeliers casting rainbow patterns across polished floors that reflected the faces of alien dignitaries who had gathered to witness the final negotiations. Representatives from the Galactic Trade Consortium sat in elevated seats like judges presiding over a trial, their various species united only in their shared interest in profitable outcomes rather than moral considerations. Cross stood at the podium wearing his finest diplomatic uniform, the medals on his chest catching the light as he prepared to deliver the speech that would seal the fate of 67 dragon children. Behind him, holographic displays showed economic projections and efficiency charts that reduced living beings to statistical data points, each graph representing years of forced labor disguised as beneficial integration programs. In the station's lower levels, Rosie Murphy crouched beside Little Spark in the cramped cargo bay, her weathered hands steady despite the fear that made her heart race like a hummingbird's wings. Around them, dragon children huddled together in groups, their scales shimmering with nervous energy as they sensed the approaching danger through their empathic connections. Some of the older children had explained what was about to happen, and even the youngest dragons understood that they were about to be separated forever. "Remember what we practiced," Rosie whispered to Little Spark, whose golden eyes reflected both terror and determination. "When Dr. Wells gives the signal, you and your friends need to touch the communication panels just like you showed me. Your abilities can reach every human colony in this sector, and once people see what's really happening here, Cross won't be able to hide behind his lies anymore." Little Spark nodded solemnly, his small clawed hands glowing with the soft bioluminescence that marked his species' connection to technological systems. "Will the humans really help us if they know we are scared?" he asked in his musical voice. "Or will they think we are just animals that do not matter?" The innocent question cut through Rosie's heart like a blade, because she knew that the answer would determine not just the fate of these children, but the moral future of humanity itself. "Some humans have forgotten how to care about others," she admitted, "but most of us still remember what it's like to love children and want to protect them. We just need to remind them that you're children first and everything else second." 3. Levels above, Dr. Wells moved through the medical bay with practiced efficiency, uploading files to portable data storage units, while his hands shook with a combination of caffeine and adrenaline. The medical records told a story of systematic neglect and emotional abuse, growth retardation from inadequate nutrition, stress fractures from sleeping on hard surfaces, and psychological profiles that showed trauma symptoms in children who should have been healing from their losses. Captain Stone's voice crackled through his communication device. "Doc, we've got 15 minutes before Cross starts the signing ceremony. Are your people in position?" "The children are ready," Wells replied, checking his chronometer against the station's central time display. "Rosie has them gathered around the main communication hub in their quarters. The moment we start broadcasting, Cross will try to cut the feeds, but the children's abilities should keep the channels open long enough to reach the civilian networks." In the ceremony hall, Cross was beginning his prepared remarks about the generous relocation assistance being provided to the dragon refugees, his words carefully chosen to obscure the reality of what was about to happen. The consortium representatives nodded approvingly as he described the children's unique abilities and their potential for meaningful contribution to galactic development projects. But in the station's communication center, Captain Stone was already implementing the plan that would expose Cross's lies to the entire human colonial network. Her fingers flew across control panels as she overrode security protocols and opened direct channels to news networks, government offices, and civilian communication hubs across dozens of worlds. "This is Captain Rita Stone of the Human Transport, vessel homeward," she announced into the microphone. "I am transmitting evidence of crimes against sentient children that are being committed in humanity's name." The first images that flashed across screens throughout human space showed the cramped, cold conditions where the dragon children had been living. The stark contrast between their bare metal quarters and the luxury of the diplomatic levels above told a story that needed no explanation. But it was the audio that followed that truly shattered the careful facade Cross had constructed. Little Spark's voice echoed through communication systems on 100 different worlds as he read his letter to Santa Claus, his childish pronunciation and innocent hope creating a moment of absolute silence in living rooms and government offices across the galaxy. "My name is Little Spark, and I am a very small dragon who lost my family when the sky fell down on my home. I heard from other children that you bring presents to good children who write letters, and I try very hard to be good even when I am scared." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Communication networks across human space lit up with incoming messages as parents, teachers, and ordinary citizens demanded explanations for what they were seeing. News anchors struggled to maintain professional composure as they reported on the story that was unfolding in real time, while government officials found themselves flooded with calls from constituents who wanted to know how such a situation had been allowed to develop in the ceremony hall. Cross felt his perfect moment slipping away as his communication aide whispered urgent updates about the spreading chaos. Representatives from the Galactic Trade Consortium were receiving their own reports about human civilian outrage, and their expressions shifted from interested approval to careful neutrality as they calculated the political costs of proceeding. With the original agreement, there seems to be some kind of technical malfunction, Cross announced, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure while security teams worked frantically to trace the source of the unauthorized broadcasts. "I'm sure we can resolve this minor interruption and proceed with our scheduled negotiations, but..." Little Spark wasn't finished. Standing in the communications center with his small hands pressed against the transmission panels, he spoke directly to the camera that Dr. Wells had positioned to show his face to the entire human colonial network. "We just wanted to be friends," he said, his golden eyes bright with tears. "Why do adults make everything so hard? We know how to fix broken things and help plants grow. We could help humans build beautiful worlds if you would let us be part of your families instead of your tools." The words hit human civilization like a sledgehammer to the conscience. Parents across the galaxy looked at their own children and imagined how they would feel if their babies were being sold to mining companies. Teachers thought about the innocence they saw in their classrooms every day and felt sick at the thought of exploiting such trust. Even hardened military officers found themselves wiping tears from their eyes as they listened to Little Spark's plea for simple friendship. Captain Stone's ship was suddenly joined by dozens of other human vessels as colonial defense forces and civilian transport ships converged on the station. Ship captains who had been following routine patrol routes changed course to answer what had become an impromptu rescue mission. The communication channels buzzed with messages of support and offers of sanctuary from human colonies that wanted to open their doors to the dragon children. Cross watched his carefully constructed deal collapse in real time as public opinion turned against him with the force of a natural disaster. The consortium representatives were already standing to leave, their interest in the transaction evaporating as they realized that proceeding would damage their relationships with human civilian populations. What had been planned as a quiet diplomatic success was becoming the most public failure in Cross's career. In the lower levels, dragon children pressed closer to the communication panels as they sensed the changing emotional atmosphere through the station's networks. Their empathic abilities allowed them to feel the wave of protective anger and compassion that was sweeping through human space. And for the first time since losing their homeworld, they began to believe that they might not be alone in the universe after all. "Are the humans really coming to help us?" Little Spark asked Rosie as the cargo bay filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. Not the heavy boots of security forces, but the lighter steps of medical personnel and civilian volunteers who were already organizing rescue efforts. Rosie picked up the small dragon and held him close, feeling his warm scales against her chest and the rapid beating of his tiny heart. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "Sometimes it takes a while for humans to remember who we're supposed to be. But when we do remember, we can move mountains to protect the people we love." 1 year later, the morning sun painted golden streaks across the windows of the Children's Center on New Terra Colony, where the sound of laughter echoed through rooms that had been designed with both human and dragon needs in mind. Large windows let in natural light that helped the dragon children's scales maintain their healthy shimmer, while climate controls kept the temperature warm enough for their comfort without making their human friends uncomfortable during playtime. Rosie Murphy stood in the doorway of the main activity room, watching as Little Spark carefully helped a human toddler named Beth build a tower from wooden blocks. His scales had grown brighter over the past year, shifting from dull silver to brilliant gold as proper nutrition and emotional security restored his natural vitality. The small dragon's patient guidance and gentle encouragement showed the natural, teaching instincts that had made his species such beloved community members on their lost homeworld. "Higher, Beth," Little Spark said in English that had improved dramatically since his arrival on New Terra. "Dragons always build their nests up high so they can see the sunrise. Do you want to see what it looks like when the light touches the very top?" Beth giggled and reached for another block, her chubby human fingers working alongside Little Spark's delicate claws as they created something beautiful together. Around them, other children played in mixed groups that would have been impossible to imagine just 1 year ago. Human and dragon children sharing toys, stories, and the kind of innocent friendship that adults often forgot was possible. The transformation had not happened overnight. The first weeks after the Christmas Eve broadcast had been chaotic as human colonies across the galaxy competed to offer homes to the dragon children, while politicians and bureaucrats scrambled to create new policies for interspecies adoption. Some colonies had been motivated by genuine compassion, while others had hoped to gain access to the dragon's unique abilities through more subtle forms of exploitation, but the dragon children themselves had helped guide the process through their empathic abilities, gravitating toward families and communities where they sensed genuine warmth and acceptance. Little Spark had chosen to stay with Rosie when she retired from station maintenance to become the director of the first Interspecies Children's Center, a decision that had surprised no one who had witnessed their bond during those dark days. On New Eden Station, Dr. Wells entered the activity room, carrying a steaming cup of tea and wearing the relaxed expression of someone who had finally found work that fed his soul rather than just paying his bills. His new position as head of the Interspecies Medical Research Institute allowed him to study the remarkable healing abilities that dragon children possessed, but more importantly, it let him ensure that research was conducted with their consent and for their benefit rather than for human profit. "The morning reports are in," he told Rosie, settling into a chair that had been positioned to give him a clear view of the playing children. 3 more colonies have requested to establish dragon adoption programs, and the Galactic Health Council wants to fund expansion of our healing research. It seems like every week brings new proof that cooperation works better than exploitation. Captain." Stone's voice crackled through the communication system as her ship entered New Terra's orbital space. "Permission to land, Director Murphy. I've got a very special delivery that I think will make some children very happy." Rosie smiled as she activated the response channel. "Permission granted, Captain. Little Spark has been asking about you every day since you sent word that you were coming for Christmas." Through the wide windows, they could see Stone's transport ship descending toward the landing pad that had been specially constructed to accommodate the increased traffic of families visiting adopted dragon children. The ship bore the insignia of the Human Protection Fleet, the organization that had grown from Stone's original refusal to participate in Cross's plan. Now her ships patrolled the border regions, ensuring that refugee populations received genuine assistance rather than exploitation. Disguised as Ada as the ship settled onto the landing pad, Little Spark abandoned his block tower and pressed his face against the window, his golden eyes bright with excitement. "Captain Rita is here," he announced to the other children. "Do you think she brought letters from the dragon children on other worlds?" The tradition had started 6 months ago when Little Spark had suggested that dragon children across human space should write to each other instead of to Santa Claus, sharing stories about their new families and the friends they had made. The letters had become a network of hope that connected scattered survivors of the homeworld disaster, helping them maintain their cultural identity while building new lives among humans. Captain Stone entered the activity room carrying a bag full of colorful envelopes, each one addressed in the careful handwriting of dragon children who were learning to write in multiple languages. "I've got 47 letters from 16 different colonies," she announced, "and every single one of them has drawings of dragon children playing with human friends." As the children gathered around to receive their mail, Rosie reflected on how much had changed since that night when she found Little Spark's discarded letter in Ambassador Cross's wastebasket. The former ambassador had been recalled to Earth in disgrace, facing charges of corruption and conspiracy that would likely keep him in prison for the rest of his life. More importantly, his downfall had triggered a broader examination of human colonial policies that led to new protections for refugee populations throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Trade Consortium had initially been furious about the collapse, of their mining deal, but they had quickly discovered that willing dragon partners were far more effective than enslaved workers. Colonies that treated dragon families as equals rather than resources found their terraforming projects proceeding faster and more successfully than anyone had imagined possible. The dragon's natural ability to encourage biological growth, combined with their intuitive understanding of ecological balance, made them invaluable allies in creating sustainable human settlements. Dr. Wells opened one of the research reports that had been delivered with the mail, scanning data that continued to amaze him even after months of study. The healing techniques that Brightwing developed on Kepler Colony have reduced surgical recovery time by 60%, he said. And the plant cultivation methods that Gentle Rain pioneered on New Geneva are producing food yields that exceed anything we achieved with purely technological approaches. But for Rosie, the most important changes were the ones she could see in the faces of the children around her. Little Spark had grown from a frightened refugee into a confident child who served as a bridge between human and dragon communities. His natural empathy and communication skills made him a gifted translator not just of languages, but of emotions and cultural concepts that helped both species understand each other better. As Christmas Eve approached once again, Little Spark had announced that he wanted to write one more letter, not to Santa Claus this time, but to human children across the galaxy. The letter had been carefully composed over several weeks with input from dragon children on dozens of different worlds. When it was finally ready, Captain Stone had volunteered to ensure it reached every human colony in the known galaxy. The letter read, "Dear human children, my name is Little Spark, and I wanted to say thank you for sharing your families with us. 1 year ago we were scared and alone, but you taught us that friendship is stronger than fear. We know how to help plants grow and fix broken things, but you taught us how to laugh and play and dream about the future. This Christmas we want to give you the best present we can think of. The promise that dragon children will always be your friends, and we will help you build a galaxy where everyone has a family who loves them." The letter had sparked a new tradition as human children began writing back, creating a correspondence network that strengthened bonds between species and planets. Parents who had initially been uncertain about interspecies adoption found themselves with children who were more compassionate, more curious, and more committed to building inclusive communities than previous generations. As the day wound down, and the children settled into their evening routines, Rosie tucked Little Spark into his specially designed sleeping nook, which combined the elevated perch that dragons preferred with the warm blankets that reminded him of human care. "Sweet dreams, little one," she said, stroking his golden scales. "Tomorrow we'll read all your letters and maybe write some new ones." "Rosie," Little Spark said sleepily, "do you think Santa Claus knows that his magic worked? Do you think he knows that one letter changed everything?" Rosie smiled as she adjusted his blankets and turned down the lights. "I think Santa knows exactly what happened," she said. "And I think he's very proud of a little dragon who believed in friendship, strongly enough to ask for it, and very proud of the humans who remembered that the best gifts are the ones we give to others." As she left the sleeping area and walked through the quiet halls of the Children's Center, Rosie reflected on the truth that had emerged from that chaotic Christmas Eve 1 year ago. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their military might, but their capacity to recognize innocence and respond to it with protection rather than exploitation. When they had seen Little Spark's letter and heard his voice asking simply for friendship, they had remembered who they were supposed to be. The galaxy was still full of challenges and conflicts, but now it was also full of dragon children who grew up believing that humans could be trusted, and human children who grew up knowing that friendship could cross any boundary. That, Rosie thought, as she turned off the lights and headed home, to her own small dragon son, was the kind of Christmas miracle that lasted forever.